let's go straight into this. So the purpose of this session really is to sort of give us a sense of the state of play in the ocean. And as I've been saying in my introduction, the ocean is moving up, I hope, I believe, in the ocean agenda as part of the priorities, the global priorities that we face. And I think certainly if it's not moving up there, which I have to say I think it is, global citizens are certainly increasingly aware of the importance of the seas for life on Earth and indeed for our own well-being. And this hasn't happened by accident, by the way. This has happened because so many extraordinary organizations, individuals, NGOs, governments, and others have actually really put the ocean into their agendas. And we're going to hear about that from our speakers. One other thing that I would say is that I think, are we in our super year for the ocean? And I think this is an interesting point because we had hoped that 2020 would be the super year for the ocean when many events and many particular treaties were being negotiated. And that was delayed, of course, because of the pandemic. And now, has so far 2022 been a super year for the ocean? And how do we assess the impact of that here in Asia Pacific? Well, to take stock, I am delighted to welcome Vivian Balakrishnan, who is the Minister for Foreign Affairs in Singapore, Ho-Sung Lee, who is the chair of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and Peter Thompson, who is the United Nations Secretary General's Special Envoy for the Ocean. Unfortunately, Mary Pangestu, who is the Managing Director of Development Policy and Partnerships at the World Bank, was unable to join us, but we do have a brief video from her, which I think we'd like to play right at the beginning. Is that right? Shall we play that video?
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good day. I'm Mary Pangestu, the Managing Director of the Development Policy and Partnerships at the World Bank. Let me start with why sustainable ocean-based economies matter. It is because it is central to economic development, given its role in supporting livelihoods and as a critical source of food security. The ocean economy has the potential to double by 2030 to $3 trillion. So yes, oceans matter. But we don't often recognize the value it provides. And to make it worse, the value is declining in an irreversible manner because of the triple environmental crisis. The impact of climate change on oceans, which is the largest global carbon sink we have, biodiversity losses, and pollution, in particular, plastics pollution. Given these interlinkages, we need to see climate, development, and oceans in an integrated way, and based on the experience we have with our Blue Economy portfolio, there are three fundamental aspects that we would like to share as best practices and framing of an effective Blue Economy moving forward. The first fundamental aspect is the need for an integrated Blue Economy approach and putting value where the costs of inaction or benefits of action, such as job creation, that will support policymakers and politicians to undertake change. While differing between countries, in general, we help countries focus on the sustainability of their ocean-based sectors in an integrated manner and ensure that the development of these sectors does not unduly impact ocean health. Given differences in country circumstances, this ranges from improving solid waste management to preventing plastic pollution to the decarbonization of shipping or promoting concrete measures to improve fisheries sustainability and have an integrated coastal management program. The second fundamental aspect is that it is essential to innovate, fill knowledge and methodology gaps, have data, tools, and metrics in order to integrate the range of sectors and quantify the benefits. We help develop innovative tools, and some examples of the work we have done include a toolkit on metrics on plastics waste in East Asia and the Pacific, and a plastics life cycle assessment framework for cities in India. We support countries more broadly to integrate the development of these oceanic sectors with diagnostics tools and data, such as marine spatial planning, where we are investing resources to help develop and operationalize marine spatial planning, and with particular focus on the importance of gender and climate change. For instance, we are working with Indonesia on this. Second is data and diagnostics, including policy simulations for pathways out of plastic pollution. So countries can develop national action plans, and we are working with a number of East Asian countries on this. And third is the fisheries sector's assessment kit. It will also be important to work together to standardize monitoring results and verification systems so that natural capital in the ocean can attract finance through the carbon market. The third fundamental aspect is financing. Financing the investment needs of the blue economy, which will be which needs to be based on adopting an integrated blue economy approach, accompanied with tools and diagnostics to measure the effectiveness of the combination of policy interventions. We know that investing $1 in key ocean actions can yield $5 in economic and health benefits, but currently only 0.01% of total global SDG funding is directed towards ocean-based solutions, and the financing available is heavily fragmented. There is a need to align efforts between the public sector, private sector, philanthropies, and all actors financing work on oceans. We need to ensure there are structures where grant and loan and budgetary resources are used in a complementary way and can unlock other sources of finance. For instance, the ProBlue, a multi-donor trust fund supported by 14 donors, hosted by the World Bank, has provided almost $100 million in grant financings since 2018, which in turn has unlocked $4 billion in World Bank financing across countries from West Africa to East Asia and many small island states in between. Grant resources and other resources that can de-risk investment are also key to attracting private capital at scale, such as grants to prepare bankable projects and grants to be blended or combined with finance from budgetary resources, development financial institutions, donors, and private capital. In addition, innovative financial instruments to unlock blue finance will be important when countries have fiscal constraints. For instance, we have assisted Seychelles to launch its first sovereign blue bond. Let me conclude by acknowledging the importance of all of us working together to help countries shape the potential to realize sustainable, resilient, and inclusive benefits of the blue economy. The ocean, not oceans, as it is one ocean, have for centuries been something to cross, to journey over. Today, ocean have brought us together. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mary. Thank you to Mary Pangestu. She was, of course, the former Minister of Trade in Indonesia and has been heavily involved in a lot of the programs in Indonesia around the blue economy. Can I just turn to you first, Minister, and just follow on from that? Obviously, Singapore has played, I think, an active role in ocean governance issues. We had, as you reminded me in your notes, the Ambassador Tommy Koh,
yes,
who was central to bringing UNCLOS across the line. How concerned are you about the state of the ocean here in Singapore and in the region, and what particular focus are you lending to that as Foreign Minister?
No, the oceans are existential for us. We're a tiny island city-state. The highest point in Singapore is 500 feet. Maybe about 1/4 of our land is reclaimed from the sea. So the rise of the ocean, the biodiversity within the ocean, food source from the ocean. Our trade is 3 times our GDP. So global supply chains, and in particular maritime trade, and the energy and the system for propelling ships. We're one of the biggest bunkering ports in the world, although we're not an energy producer. So on all these scores, we're absolutely dependent. And that's why Tommy played such a critical role for UNCLOS. This year is special, it's our 40th anniversary. And you have to understand, therefore, from a Singapore perspective, UNCLOS is the paramount constitution for the oceans. And similarly, Ambassador Rina Lee is now president of the Intergovernmental conference on BBNJ, Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdictions. We were hoping it'd be settled this year.
Yeah.
It didn't. So we hope we'll see a breakthrough next year. So anyway, you are preaching to the converted here in Singapore.
Although, of course, Singapore does, and we will come on to some of this discussion, have quite a few challenges when it comes to its own carbon emissions, for example, and also questions around reclamation, I think, on the ocean, about whether that reclamation has an impact on the biodiversity of the ocean.
Well, first of all, in the case of Singapore, we're kind of reaching the limits anyway. We are, in fact, sea-locked. If you look at the map, we're surrounded by territorial waters of our neighbors. So I don't think reclamation is a significant issue for the future going forward for us. What is more important is if you take a step back, climate change, oceans, pandemics, cyberspace, and outer space are actually 5 examples of the tragedy of the commons. And if you accept that, then the bigger strategic question is, have we got the politics, the economics, and the technology right? Actually, the latter, technology, is the easiest part of the equation, because all the technology needed to solve climate change, to protect the oceans, is already available. It's just a question of application. So what prevents application is politics and economics. And I'll just end on this point on economics. The key point for both climate change and oceans is costing externalities. And so long as we do not allocate the cost of externalities to the producers and traders involved in the supply chains, we're not going to get this right. Now, in order to get this right, you need the politics, right? And when I say politics, I'm referring to both geostrategic politics as well as domestic politics. So let me end with one point, because in fact, my real relevance here is that I used to be the former Minister for Environment. I was heavily involved in the negotiations that led up to the Paris Agreement. You know, the old, arcane, interminable arguments, but whose fault is it? The developed world, the developing countries say, look, we didn't send up carbon dioxide for the last 200 years. Those arguments will go on and on and on. But actually, one not so subtle agenda I had then was transparency, which means as long as we create a system where every government has to report what we're doing or not doing, and then the people who will hold our feet to the fire is actually not the international community. It's our own domestic people, and young people in particular.
Well, let me come back to that question of climate change in a second, because I think there's a lot more that we need to unpack around that. But if I could come to you, Peter Thompson. I mean, politics is something that the politics of international institutions particularly, is something you've been very, very closely aware of and involved with. But you also have an extraordinary and, I think, hugely envious position, being able to look at the ocean in the way that you do, represent it globally, and to see the ocean around the world from the eyes and the perspectives of many other people. The Selvagen Islands, you were there. Most recently in the North Atlantic, you were in Fiji. I'm following your tweets. But also, you've been speaking to scientists, businesses, government officials, and so on and so forth. You have an extraordinarily wide remit. How would you summarize the current state of the ocean, particularly given the perspectives that you're given from others?
Thanks very much. And can I just say, first of all, thanks very much to the Economist Impact for continuing this series of World Ocean Summits. I try and attend every one of them. It is the meeting point for the business world with governments, with academia, with NGOs, and it's proved its great worth globally in that regard. So thank you to all involved, and thanks to the government of Singapore for once again hosting us. I just want to, before I answer your question, Charlie, just agree with the Minister about the cost of externalities, and I guess that means different things to different folks, but for me it means costing in nature into all your calculations, whether you're a government or a corporation. In the 20th century it was enough just to say, this is a contribution to GDP, or this is our bottom line, this is our profit figure. Nature wasn't even in the consideration in your balance sheet. That's wrong. Why is that wrong? Because, as I said to some bankers at the G20 last week or the week before, there will be no economy if we don't have the sustainable blue economy, because things are collapsing around us very fast. And I'll say a bit more about that later. Just to answer a question, Charlie, my daily mantra is no healthy planet without a healthy ocean, and the ocean's health is currently in decline, measurably so. So that's a pretty dismal thing to wake up to every day, but it is the veracity in it. Just think about every second breath you take is coming from the ocean. So that's why we need to have a healthy ocean, apart from all the other thousands of reasons. So where is that decline happening? Look, it's across the board. Every sector of relevance in terms of the ocean's health is in decline, some worse than others. If you take, pollution's been mentioned, plastics pollution, and I'm really thrilled that tomorrow we're going to hear from the coalface from Uruguay, where negotiations are underway for the internationally binding treaty to control plastic pollution on this planet. If you look at the state of pollution, though, Charlie mentioned the invisible wave report that was put out by The Economist. Please read that if you haven't. It's scary stuff. It puts chemical pollution right up there in terms of global priorities with biodiversity loss and climate change. And that's a very big statement, obviously, but read the report and you'll see why. And it's very closely related to the plastic pollution thing, which everybody is now aware of, because the chemicals, the toxic chemicals, attach themselves to the microplastics that come back to us in our fish and on our beaches and so on. So if anything is a takeaway for you from Singapore over the next couple of days, look at chemical pollution. It's so important, especially as we approach the UN Biodiversity Conference in Montreal next month. And take fishing, decline, 34%. Overfishing is what FAO reports to us year after year, and that figure doesn't improve, it gets worse every time there's a report from the FAO. I could go on. I don't want to oppress people because there is a positive side to the story and the solutions are there. But for example, I've just come from Fiji, my home, where I went to see the family for the first time since before COVID. And we spent a lot of time diving with my granddaughters, got them PADI certified while we were there. And where we were diving up in Taveuni, where our family's from, pristine coral, just beautiful to see. Clear waters, pollution-free, the world the way it should be. And so, I do want to give that sense of hope that, that there are these hope spots around the world and that we can amplify them and use them. So, but you don't want to lose them. That's the big thing. And that's why we've got to, coming back to your point, Minister, about costing nature into all our calculations. Thank you.
Hugely important, Peter, thank you. And thank you for those very, very welcome plugs for the issue of chemical pollution. Thank you so much for that, because it is something close to what we believe to be really important, and we will be talking about that in a session a little bit later. Can I come, Hosung Lee, to you? And I mean, obviously, a lot of your focus at the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has been around the ocean in a broad sense. Can I ask you your impressions of the state of play for the health of the ocean in a general way without, do you have a sense of that beyond climate change and the issues that are impacting the ocean as a result of climate change?
Thank you, Charles, and also thank you for inviting me to this very important conference. And before I came to this conference, I was in the COP27 up until the last moment. And the COP27 was held in the midst of ongoing energy crisis and concerns about food insecurity. And many people wondered what's the meaning of holding a climate change conference in this, the ongoing various crises. And I asked myself that why isn't there a UN Framework Convention on Energy Crisis? Why isn't there a UN Framework Convention on Food Insecurity? While we have a UNFCCC. And it seems to me the answer was obvious. The energy crisis or food crisis, what have you, you can relate directly those crises to your pocket. And you pay for the consequence of that crisis, whether it's energy or food. In other words, market system can take care of the instability in the energy, instability in foods. However, climate is different. There's no market for climate services, and therefore, the governments have to be involved in resolving these problems. And that's the reason why the UNFCCC is in existence for 30 years. And that's the reason why, as just Minister mentioned, that those externalities, climate change is a global externality problem. And that's right, and as Minister said, there has to be a price on these carbon emissions. The problem was that it's so difficult to impose that mantra of internalizing the externalities into this matter. Now, oceans. We know that our special report on oceans clearly indicated that we are fastly approaching the various tipping points existing in the ecosystems in the marine and oceans. And the reason for that was very serious. As both of you mentioned, there was no measure of accountability of using the services provided by the ocean and coastal the marine areas. In other words, our wealth, our development depended upon using natural capital without paying for the services of natural capital. So that has to change. And I believe that Oceans Conference is one way of contributing to establishing the proper ways of finding internalizing this external cost.
I would strongly agree with all of that. Can I just take that point, but come back to Sharm el-Sheikh, Minister, and just ask you what your thoughts were coming out of COP27. Did 1.5 degrees die in Sharm el-Sheikh?
I think it's in ICU.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll have to defer to you on the scientific assessment, but I think we are in perilous state, and our chances of achieving 1.5, I think, are very, very small. But we should hear from the real expert.
But I do want to hear a little bit more from you, if I can. I mean,
Yes.
Where do you think the obstacles really lie? I mean, mainly they seem to be, as we've all been saying, political. But you're a great believer in multilateralism and in the
Yes.
process of multilateralism.
Well,
Why do you think that process is just?
If I wind back to Paris, the key breakthrough which occurred was that I saw with my own eyes the United States and China having consensus and making common cause. And once that was obvious, it became so much easier to get the rest of the room on board. So unfortunately, we are at a moment also of a geostrategic crisis. There is a lack of strategic trust, and that pervades all the different dimensions of their accounts. And without the two biggest emitters making common cause, it's well nigh impossible for the rest of the world to say, well, we can solve it. Now, of course, we're a believer in multilateralism. It's not just the two of them. But, you know, there's this point about the Kindleberger trap. I'm not sure whether many people in this room are familiar with it. But basically, if the superpower or superpowers of the time do not underwrite and structure the global strategic architecture to look after the global commons, we end up with a crisis. So we are now at a moment of crisis upon crisis. Climate change has been cooking for a long time, but all the current problems, geostrategic, the pandemic, even the developments in the digital aspect and the growth of data centers, right? There's a confluence of all these, and that's why it's hard to be an optimist about 1.5.
I mean, before I ask you, Ho-Sung, about 1.5 as well, can I just ask you to extend that thought and that discussion around geopolitical rivalry, particularly between the United States and China, and its impact on the ocean environment globally, but also here particularly in the Asia-Pacific region and in the South China Sea, where we've seen a lot of Chinese activity, and indeed quite a lot of activity that's degraded the ocean environment. What is the challenge strategically, geostrategically there with those two powers and getting ocean environment onto the agenda?
Well, as I said, the first missing ingredient is strategic trust between the two of them. The next aspect is a belief in multilateralism. You see, the problem is if you are a superpower, you actually have options. Superpowers often feel they can go for it alone, or sometimes maybe just two of them. But multilateralism, and Fiji and Singapore do not need to be convinced about the necessity for multilateralism, because for small states, making common cause, subjecting ourselves to common rules, finding a way to account for externalities in a fair way, we actually have no other choice. Now, to get two superpowers who are not getting along famously at this moment to exercise self-restraint, and it's like a giant being held down by the Lilliputian ropes, and to say, yes, we will agree to multilateral rules and institutions and processes and be held accountable to it. So that's the second level that's missing, a real commitment to multilateralism. And the third is, and this is where the private sector has to come in, that we need to get out of just purely extractive economics, but to one which is sustainable, where you keep your balance sheet stable. You can still have a profitable P&L, but you don't deplete your capital, your natural capital. So we need to get all these things, the geostrategic side, the multilateralism, and the whole paradigm of economic development, right?
I raised part of that in the introduction that I made, and my own skepticism about the difficulties of moving and transitioning towards sustainable economic activity. But I want to come back, if I can, to COP27 and Ho-Sung and Peter. did 1.5 degrees, that same question, did it die in Sharm el-Sheikh? And importantly, if so, what in your view are the implications for the ocean?
1.5 degrees fate. And when IPCC released this report, it says that you probably noticed already, the physics and chemistry says it is possible.
Possible.
Possible, yes. That tells me that economics and politics is the key. And so far, achieving 1.5 degrees C is understood as some sort of negative consequences for the economic growth, continued increase in living standard. And I think that 1.5 degrees C should be made available for all of us with increase in income, with increases in living standard. Let me give an example. During the pandemic, the greenhouse gas emissions, CO2 emission, declined about 7% per year during those very short periods of time. And at that time, the world economy dropped by 4%. Now, that's not the way that we wish to achieve greenhouse gas emission reductions. The 1.5 degrees Celsius and carbon neutrality by 2050 means that we will achieve that 1.5 degrees with the increased economic, increased standard of living. Now, as Minister mentioned, technology is there, and also we have the knowledge of how to use the technology and other know-hows to tackle that challenge. What matters is there's lack of political will, and also I believe there's a certain lack of personal motivation in approaching this 1.5 degrees Celsius stabilization. And all the models, I just don't want to say too much about the models, all the models indicate that we probably will have some increases in global temperatures beyond 1.5, and then, no matter what, but then we should be able to reduce that increase, turning back to 1.5 degree by the latter half of this century. So in the end, we should be able to achieve the 1.5 degrees Celsius stabilization throughout this century. Now, that's what science says. And the important point is that to achieve that, we need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions as soon as possible. And that's the challenge. I believe that can be done if there's a political will, if there's a personal, at the level of individual, there's a motivation to do so.
Will it be done?
Yes, I think so, yes. And again, we have noticed that a number of countries, about some 10 plus countries have reduced greenhouse gas emissions for about 10 years in a row. And we also noticed that the CO2 emissions for the last 10 years, its growth rate is about half the growth rate compared to the previous 10 years. That's a positive sign. And then also there's a number of countries declaring a net zero aspirational target, although it's an aspiration, but publicly announced net zero. A number of countries, according to the various reports, including the UN reports. So that's a positive sign.
So I'm probably in the camp of being more pessimistic around whether or not it can be achieved. But Peter, can I come to you and ask you, is 1.5 degrees, have we shot beyond that? And more importantly, what are the implications for the ocean?
Look, you'd like me to be an optimist, I think, but I'm just kind of a hard-headed pragmatist. I don't have any alternative because I'm a grandfather, and that's my motivation, my thinking, and my actions. So pragmatism is what matters rather than optimism or the opposite. Multilateralism, Minister talked very eloquently about it there, and I was listening with great interest. Look, nations rise and fall in their influence on this planet, but the one thing that doesn't change is that they have to relate to each other, whether they're nations or civilizations or cultures. They have to relate to each other because we're on one planet. So we've coined this term multilateralism to describe that, and it lives on forever. It's unavoidable, multilateralism. Is it dead now? You often read in the media how multilateralism is dead. Absolutely not, and it never will die, as I say. And you only have to look at this year to look at the success of the decision at the UNEA 5, the environmental conference in Nairobi, to negotiate this internationally binding treaty to control plastic pollution. That was multilateralism at its best. I was there at the moment when, you know, all delegations present, including those superpowers, were up dancing around like kids at a disco when we gavelled that one. Geneva, after 20 years of negotiations on harmful subsidies, you know, there was universal agreement from all parties. And I could list more that are happening as we go forward. So multilateralism, and from my long experience at the UN, is the best thing we've got going for us, actually. And there's nothing more demonstrative than that than the Montreal Protocol, actually. You know, had we not, as a group of countries, all the countries on the planet, agreed to control fluorocarbons. And remember, back then, the refrigeration industry was telling us, you take away our fluorocarbons and there won't be any more cold beer in your fridges. Understand that, everybody. We said, we're taking them away. The fluorocarbons are creating a hole in the ozone. We're all going to be dead of skin cancer if we don't fix that. So we fixed it. And look at today. So that's purely a product of multilateral agreement. And we're coming back to Montreal next month, as I said, at the UN Biodiversity Conference, where hopefully we'll fix it again and bring in things like 30 by 30. So I just want to say, first of all, you know, I totally agree with what the Minister was saying, but to say as a pragmatist, not as an optimist, that multilateralism is our best and really only way of governing this planet. Secondly, to answer your question, Charlie, and I've kind of forgotten what it was, 1.5, is it still alive?
1.5, but
I hope so, because
yeah.
I'm totally redundant if it's not, because I'm wearing the 1.5 button here from Sharm el-Sheikh. And I am, again, as a pragmatist, a great believer that that's still achievable. At the UN Ocean Conference, you know, I have these 3 a.m. moments with jet lag where I think about the big problems. And so I went from one of those moments down to a speech at breakfast at the UN Ocean Conference in Lisbon, and I started talking about the highway to hell. And it just sort of came at me at 3 a.m. in the morning that we are on a highway to hell. And, you know, we're driving down this highway, we've got the kids in the back, and they're all screaming. They don't want to go to 3 degrees. The big sign up ahead says 3 degrees on this motorway we're heading down. They're screaming in the back, so we say, give them more ice cream, let them watch TV. Right, we've got to get there. This is so comfortable, this highway. We love it. We're worth it as we go down this highway. And that's not exaggeration. You know, the Secretary General of the United Nations, not some guy on a soapbox at Hyde Park Corner, the Secretary General of the United Nations, arguably the leader of humanity, has said, red alert for humanity, we are destroying the life support systems of this planet. 3 degrees is unlivable situation for humanity and for most of nature. But we're still on that highway. I see that the UN system has now picked up that lexicon. They've softened it a bit by saying highway to climate hell. Fine. But anyway, it came from that speech in Lisbon, and I am firmly of the belief that that's where we're going. But, folks, there is still this sign. It's not as big a sign as the 3 degrees one. There's still a sign on the motorway, you know, those lovely green things you got, and it's got an arrow going off here to 1.5. And you have a look at your map and you say, oh my God, but this is a rocky road and it's a narrow road. Well, our kids can live in 1.5. Our grandkids can live there. You don't have a choice. You have to take that turn off. You have to transform. So is 1.5 still alive, Charlie? I'd say yeah, if we've got the guts to take that turn off.
It seems like I'm the one out of kilter here on the stage. But thank you, Peter. Thank you. And I think that's an important point for us to just consider as we go through the course of the next day to a day and a half. Can I ask if there are any questions or thoughts from the audience to this very esteemed panel here. Any thoughts or questions? Yes, down here. I believe I've got my, it's dark, but I think it's now Okoishi, is it? Yes.
She'll need
Can we just have a microphone down there, please? Yes.
Thank you so much for such an insightful opening. I have a question for the panel, maybe particularly maybe for the minister. Would it be possible, without really costing the externalities in the economic decision-making, to achieve 1.5? I think this entire community has been struggling for decades how to cost and account for the value of the nature of the natural capital into the decision-making. And without that, would it be possible to achieve the 1.5? So, and then when we see that what's going on, we have been really struggling, the TCFD, TNFD. And if the economics and the politics make it happen, I actually don't think that we can achieve the 1.5 with those just fragmented, scattered good news around the world.
Well, I'm afraid I totally agree with you. We do need to account for the externalities. And that's why I was emphasizing the need for transparency, that every country, what we put out into the atmosphere or what we push into the oceans needs to be visible. And we need our feet to be held to the coals. And I was saying that it might be actually it's the younger generation for whom green has become a religion. And you must remember, politicians are not voted by the global electorate. We're voted domestically. It is that domestic pressure, hopefully brought to bear, that will keep us all on the narrow. You described it as a rocky road, but in fact what you want to get onto is the straight and narrow path to heaven.
All right, let me ask if there are any other questions. Down at the back, please, yes. If you could just get a microphone down there, please. Could you just say your name and your organization when you have a moment, please?
Hi.
Yes, it's on. We can hear you.
Hi, Kiran Jetwa from Fumase. We are developing green hydrogen projects. So before I make my comment, I just want to mention that this is not directed directly to the panelists, okay? It's basically in general. So I hear the words, we need to, we should. When are we going to actually start using words like, okay, this is what we are doing? Here's the pathway to get to net zero. And here's the year-by-year project plan to get to net zero. Are we doing that? Instead of using words like need to, should, etc. Thanks.
Yes, it's a good question. And to achieve net zero and to achieve 1.5 degree and net zero by 2050, we have to, sorry, use this word, we have to reduce carbon emissions 7% per year. This year, probably the emissions will rise about 4%, rather than by decreasing 7%. That's the reality. Now, we all agree that there's a technology available, the know-how available. Depends upon how we utilize that tools, utilize that very innovative approach. So it's really up to us, but up to us means rather, I think that confuses the approach. It is the government who should lead this battle against the climate change, because climate change is a public goods problem. It is an externality problem, and not the market's problem, not the private sector's problem, not the individual incentive problem. It is the government sector who should lead this process. Highway to the Hell, that's fine. And COP is trying to resolve this problem, but COP does not have the power of COP, please. And that exactly summarizes the problem we have right now.
COP does not have the power of cops. I quite like that. I haven't heard that one before. Minister,
There's a hand there.
I see, but can I just ask you to follow up on that question? Should we have better, stronger language? Should
Well,
we
I
be
think
moving towards,
all governments should be accounting and publishing what they're doing. Now, I can't speak for all governments. I can just speak for Singapore. In our case, we know what we're putting out. We know how much it's going to cost us to bring that down. For an island state like us with no energy resources, at every single joule we have to pay for, we are exquisitely conscious of the cost. But let me also get real. If all of us in Singapore stop breathing, climate change would still proceed down that road to hell.
That doesn't prevent you accelerating your progress.
Yes, of course. But the point is we all need to do so. And we all need to be transparent. We all need to be accountable. And ultimately, it is our own people, particularly the young people, who will, I hope, cause this revolution globally.
A question down in the front there, and then we'll come to a question there if we can. Yeah, thanks.
Hi, morning. I'm Eric. I'm from the Philippines. Just 2 points. Anybody can answer. Why do we have Tetra Pak in water for water beside you? That's a very unsustainable package.
Oh, this one.
Yeah. That will stay 1,000 years in the ocean. So my other point is down to hell. I think we have to approach our morality because the chemistry is there, the physics is there, technology is there, but the consciousness is not there. And I'm from Zero Waste Philippines, and that's a hard sell to get people to shift, especially when they have less money in their pockets and they have to follow a moral standard. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. We've got a question down here as well. I think that was a comment rather than a question, but down here. Is it Joy Danielson? Yes, Joy. Hello.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Joy Danielson from Systemic. I really liked the question, the previous question, and this follow-up question. I've been thinking a lot personally about, I guess, this work plan for global change, right? And I come from a background in management consulting where we often had something called a PMO office, like a program management office, which facilitated all the actions that needed to be done and were very transparent and kept everyone to account when we were doing these, huge transformation projects. It feels like we need something like that for the world and for climate. And I'm just wondering, do we have an entity that exists that can play that role, that is trusted enough? And if not, do we need to create one?
Well, Peter, can I come to you and just see whether or not you feel that's necessary?
I was just thinking about our friend from the Philippines here. I think you're probably a bit younger than me, but you can probably remember the world as it was when we were young, There was no plastic. Tourism industry was just for a few rich people. Yeah, and hey, when I look back at it, wasn't such a bad place. Okay, so what I'm saying is that we can downscale a lot, number one. Middle class, we're going to find that hard to do, but we can downscale not back to where we were, because we've lifted a lot of people out of poverty in the last 50 years. So we don't want that, but we can all accept a lot less than we currently have, right? It's not a human right to sit on a beach and have somebody bring you a cocktail, That's not a human right when you consider that there are parts of the world where people have to walk for half a day to get a little jug of water to give water to their kids back in the village where they're living. So we can accept a lot less, but thanks for your question. In terms of, who do we trust, I think we go back to that multilateralism thing. We have the United Nations system, And it's a great system, whether you're talking FAO or UNEP or IAEA or WTO or all our regional organizations like ESCAP. It is a system which has been set up for this, these sort of challenges that we face on a global basis. So I think we've got it. I'd just say support the UN system. It belongs to us. It's our family. We don't need to invent anything else. We just have to apply ourselves more faithfully to it.
But you're saying, Joy, that you think there should be a supranational PMO, in a sense, that drives and coordinates all of the change. Do you think that might be something that's...
I don't think the problem is not the lack of new institutions. We have enough good number of institutions that contribute to the solution of all these problems. The question is, again, how we can utilize the existing approaches from the existing institutions can be realized. With regard to the climate change problems, based upon our assessment, IPCC assessment, it is very clear. Developed countries promise what they promised, need to implement those promises, and developing countries should be able to pursue sustainable development based upon technology transfer and financial transfer. That's the conclusion of the IPCC findings. Now, if that does not be available, then we'll have tremendous problems. And developing countries will have to invest in the new infrastructure. We hope that that new infrastructure will be carbon-free infrastructure. And that part needs a substantial help from the developed world. That's the key.
I'm afraid, I'm sorry, we have run out of time. Am I right in saying that? I mean, we've run over by about 5 or 10 minutes. Do we have any further time? I can't see my colleagues in the back there, but I think we have run out of time. I think finally, we haven't always talked about the ocean, but we've talked a lot about climate. Just to bring this back to the ocean and to bring it back to something that we're very concerned about, the blue economy, my own concerns looking at the blue economy as a final thought, and if we could be very brief, please, are that, as I said earlier, that growth is focused on more than sustainability. My worry and my great interest in what Indonesia was saying, that was that finally here we have a country, a very important ocean nation that's looking to develop some ideas and thoughts around the ocean economy. But I wonder whether we're going in the right direction. Briefly, if I can ask Peter and the Minister, your thoughts there.
Okay, less than 30 seconds. First point, I'm not a supporter of the blue economy, which may sound funny as the chief advocate for SDG 14, because obviously the sustainable blue economy is what I support. Sustainable. No more linear exploitation of finite planetary resources. If you're thinking ocean, don't just think about the fact, oh, I'm going to go out there and rip off whatever the ocean can give me before anybody else gets it. It's not what we are talking about in the 21st century. We're talking about circular systems. This is what the sustainable blue economy is about. Whether it's fishing or whatever you're getting into, make sure that you've got that sustainable word in front of it. And the other two words that you should always be thinking about, apart from sustainable, is the principle of intergenerational justice. Let that rule your thinking too.
Minister, briefly.
The oceans covers, I think, more than 70% of our planet's surface area. Human beings have overexploited land. The danger is that if we use that same economic extractive model that we used on land, we translate that to the oceans, it's going to be an absolute tragedy. So the point that Peter makes about sustainable blue economy is absolutely critical. Now, I'm actually hopeful. Through multilateral processes, we do have UNCLOS, We do have the UN Convention on Climate Change. We hope to have, within the next year or two, a treaty on biodiversity beyond national jurisdictions. If we can now get our maritime bunkering trade, make that transition into sustainable energy sources, we actually have the building blocks in place to avoid making the mistakes that we made in the last 250 years of the Industrial Revolution. So if I could just end with that note of cautious optimism.
Minister, I think that's a good note to end on, and that starts us well, I think, for the rest of the conference. Please join me in thanking Minister Balakrishnan, Ho Sung Lee from the IPCC,
Thank you.
and Peter Thompson
Thank you.
from